Good evening, everybody. My name is Renan Goldman from Goldfuss Insurance. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Thank you to AACI for hosting this event. Goldfuss Insurance has been working or been associated with AACI for many years, and we enjoy helping and assisting Olim of the AACI, and of course any Olim that we can help. Goldfuss Insurance has been around since 1971, assisting English-speaking communities and English-speaking Olim ever since. So today's lecture essentially is going to be explaining private health insurance, what its function is, and how it can provide you with some solutions outside of the Kupat Cholim and essentially what it does. So I'll get into it. I'm going to share my screen, so just bear with me while I set that up, and we'll start the presentation from there. If there are any questions, please type them into the chat. I hope that I'll be able to get to all the questions. If not, you'll have some contact information of mine at the end, where you'll be able to write down the email address, and we can definitely arrange a time to answer any questions if I don't get to everything during the lecture. Okay. So, there we go. Okay. So today's lecture, we're going to be looking at unraveling the world of insurance, in particular health insurance. But before that, we're going to look at a few points. Essentially, what is insurance? We all know what insurance is. We all know what its function does. That's essentially allowing us to protect risks, to cover ourselves against situations where we may be at a loss, where we may be in a situation of financial assistance as a result of an insurance event, something where there is a catastrophic event or a specific contingency against a specific peril, whatever it might be. Insurance is there to help us deal with a problematic situation, i.e. a loss, to be the main point. In Israel, insurance is split into two main elements, but here it's split even further to a third element as part of one of them. What that means is you've got elementary insurance. Elementary insurance essentially is focusing and covering you for the annual policies, the policies that are one-year policies or short-term policies such as travel insurance, or annual policies such as car insurance, home insurance, business liability. Those are the policies that you would need to renew on a regular basis. And you can make changes somewhat freely between that if and when is needed throughout that insurance period. The next element is on life insurance. Life insurance is split into two components. There's the life insurance relating to the individual, to the person. That's looking at life insurance, the risk to life and to the risk to the family. Health insurance, long-term care insurance falls under that category. Critical illness coverage, personal accident, mortgage, disability income. Those are policies that one can purchase on their own as an individual for themselves to cover the risk for the family as well. The other life insurance component is talking about pension planning. That also falls under Bituach Chaim in terms of the insurance industry. And that's focusing on pension plans, Keren Hishtalmut, investments. That's just giving you a quick summary as to what is the insurance world and what this does for you, what the different categories are. If you see them on your credit card statements, you'll understand a little better as to what is what. What's the focus of today? Focus for today is going to be on private health insurance, as I said. So let's get into that. Even though the Kupat Cholim system is an excellent system, the idea of private health insurance is that it fills the gaps where the Kupat Cholim system falls short. Okay. Now, essentially, what happens is that we pay Bituach Lomi, be it through directly to the Kupat, we pay Bituach Lomi directly, or we pay out of our pay slip, and that money that we pay to Bituach Lomi, which is called Dmei Briut, or whatever it might be, however it's defined within your statements there, that allows us to access the main basket of healthcare, which is facilitated by one of the four Kupat Cholim. That's Maccabi, Leumit, Clalit, and Me'uchedet. They allow for the initial contact with the primary caregivers. That allows us access to hospitalization, to the medicines in part of the government health basket, etc. That gives us the main cover, but essentially we're paying Bituach Leumi for that component. What does the main basket give us? Well, it's based on the law. It's based on what the government requires and regulates the Kupat Cholim to cover. So essentially, the application is open to all residents, not citizens. So there are people that have been here who are not necessarily citizens, but may still be able to access and register for a Kupat Cholim because they've been living here long term. That also means, on the flip side, that citizens may not be eligible to sign up for health insurance immediately through the Kupat Cholim. For example, a returning resident who's been out of the country for a significant amount of time may need to either try to pay X amount for whatever it is for Bituach Leumi to waive a wait period, or wait a wait period of about 6 months and before they can start accessing the main basket. Why 6 months? That basically is determined by Bituach Leumi as to who is a resident of the country. You have the ability to select whichever Kupat Cholim you want, irrespective of what your pre-existing conditions are. You can choose the Kupat Cholim provider within there. You can choose whichever network is affiliated with your Kupat Cholim, but you have the freedom to access whatever it is that you need to access, but of course within the network of doctors and clinics, etc., that they work with. Choice of fund without limitations. They cannot exclude you for any pre-existing conditions or with regard to age or whatever the state or whatever other state of health might be. They must cover you for all your pre-existing conditions and cannot exclude you. Okay, and essentially that's because it's giving you coverage for everybody. The state is responsible for providing funding for everybody. That is the socialized healthcare system. You have those who are paying a percentage of their salary. You have those that are paying a minimal amount. Everybody has the same access of coverage, irrespective of who's paying what. So that's the idea of the law. Okay. Now, every Kupat Cholim does have their supplementary basket. So you have the Kupat Cholim, for example, you have Maccabi has Maccabi Zahav or Sheli, Me'uchedet has C or Adif, Clalit has Mushlam Platinum, Leumit Zahav, or I forget what the other one is that they offer. But essentially what this does is that this extends the main basket of healthcare to not just being the main basket, but rather giving additional services to the members of that Kupat Cholim, be it for consultations with specialists or diagnostic testing, or the ability to access special treatments. For example, for children, if there's developmental treatments that one needs, or if there is one that needs glasses, then there's certain discounts, or dental care, there are certain discounts that you might be able to get through the supplementary basket of the Kupat Cholim. They also may cover up until a certain point for a private surgery, which we'll get to. So it's important to remember what this is called, the supplementary basket, the Shaban, because there is a surgery coverage in the private policy that will relate back to the Shaban, and that's called Mashlim Shaban, but we'll come back to that shortly. So that's essentially giving you that supplementary basket of the Kupat Cholim to the main basket of care. But it's important to keep in mind that the agreement with the Kupat Cholim is an agreement, for better or for worse. The terms and conditions, as well as the deductibles, all the different variations can change every few years. And we're all in the same boat. I got a letter from Maccabi a few years ago saying that the cost to see a specialist is going to go up and my deductibles might change, etc. But I believe that everybody in the Maccabi system got the same letter. And everybody has their own relationship with their Kupat Cholim, where they will tell you and determine what it is that they're able to provide. Now, they're also government regulated, so it has to comply within the law, okay? And there are limitations as a result of the fact that it must comply with regard to the law. Now, what are those limitations? The main limitations are the following: medicines not covered in the government health basket, transplants coverage, and surgeries coverage. Surgeries on a private basis. Okay, now we'll go into more depth for each one, but essentially this is where the private health insurance policies come in and provide a solution to those gaps. Okay, the main essence of the private insurance policies are what we're about to discuss now. So let's take the health basket. The government health basket, essentially, as you can see here, is an article from 2016. It says here that only 300 million shekel was allocated to expand the 2016 health basket. I'm sorry if it's a bit blurry. The resolution is often better. I'm not sure what happened to this image. But essentially, the idea of this is that there is a committee who determines which drugs fall onto the government health basket. There is a budget of, let's say, 3 million shekel. I believe last year or this year it was 600 million shekel. But there is a shopping list of 2 billion shekel. There are new drugs being developed all the time. The government has to determine how many drugs or which drugs will be added to the government health basket. And as a result, we can see that there's a shortfall at times. Now, I'm going to play a small clip here about a client, not a client, but rather a report through the news of somebody who did experience the use of the benefits of the private insurance and where the Kupat Cholim did fall short. So let's play the clip. I hope you'll all be able to hear it clearly. If not, I'll make sure to translate it shortly.
כתבתנו לענייני בריאות רחלי אפרים הכינה כתבה על חולים שממתינים להכרעות של חברי ועדת הסל. בואו נראה את הכתבה. לא נתנו לו שום סיכוי, פשוט אמרו לו לחכות לנס או למשהו אחר שיקרה. פיני לנמן, בן 58, כבר הרגיש את הסוף. הוא חולה זה 6 שנים בלוקמיה כרונית, סוג של סרטן הדם. אילולא היה מגלה את תרופת האימברוטינib בפברואר שעבר, היום לא היה משוחח עמנו.
הייתי מקבל בין 4 ל-6 מנות דם בשבוע, עשרות מנות דם. המוגלובין שלי לא התרומם מעל 7.5. הייתי חלש, הייתי כל הזמן במצב מאוזן, הייתי שוכב או יושב. ממש תרופת פלא. וזה שינה את חיי, אני עד היום מקבל את זה.
כ-150 חולים נזקקים לתרופה זו בכל שנה, כך טוענים הרופאים. עלותה כ-60,000 שקלים בחודש, ועכשיו היא עומדת להיכנס לסל התרופות.
התרופה הזאת היא תרופה מצילת חיים, היא חוסכת אשפוזים, היא חוסכת טיפולים אינטנסיביים על ידי השתלות מהחצם, או טיפולים שדורשים אשפוזים ארוכים.
So as you can see from that clip, for those who did understand it, and for those who didn't, essentially, what is the clip telling us? Penny, the man who was being interviewed, had a very rare leukemia, form of leukemia, and there was only one drug that was able to be, there was one drug that was helping him. It was a life-saving medication, reducing hospitalization. Without that drug, he was on about 15 units of blood a week, and he just wasn't able to function. That drug allowed him to be able to function again. The cost of that drug was 60,000 shekel a month. 60,000 shekel a month. Now, where's the problem? That with this report, what it was showing, and this report is from a few years ago, this report is showing you that the government was considering adding that drug to the government health basket, which means that Penny, this individual, was able to access this drug by using his private health policy, where people without the policy, where are you going to find 60,000 shekel a month? The idea is that there are going to be shortfalls, that the government cannot provide medicines that are not inside of the government health basket. There's always going to be a shortfall simply because of the budget. The idea is that the private policies will provide a solution for new developed drugs, for drugs that have passed R&D that are still very expensive because they're just after the R&D stage. Yes, they've got the FDA approval and all the rest of it and the European equivalent, but again, unless they're accepted by the government health basket and included, then an individual might have to find 60,000 shekel a month to be able to cover those costs. Now, again, not every drug is going to be that cost. Some drugs might be 5,000 shekel a month. Some drugs might be more. But the idea is that it allows for a coverage that is going to allow an individual to access the drugs that they need and not be limited to just what the government health basket is covering you for. So we take for granted that the antibiotics and the cholesterol medications and the whatever medications that we have access to, the generic medications, we have access to them and we don't think twice. But it is the medicines that are outside the life-saving, life-extending medications that really can be the significant cost there. Private policies will also cover off-label medications that are effective in treatments in other conditions. So for example, if there is a drug that is found to be or is suitable for another drug but has only been assigned for that specific condition within the government health basket, then the private policies will cover that drug for alternative use as well. And most of the companies will cover or extend coverage for experimental medications and customized medications as well. So that's something that's worth considering in the event that you're going to look at that. A lot of the times those extensions are riders on the policy, which we'll get to, but don't forget that they exist if you're considering a health insurance policy, because it is an important feature and an important addition to the policy. Next is transplants. This is somewhat of a dated graph, but it still shows the relevance nonetheless. This is showing you the number of the population of Israel in 2012, 2011, etc., and the number of AACI card members. Okay, AACI card members are basically people who are registered donors. So as you can see, in 2012, there was a population of just under 8 million people, and only 700,000 people who were registered AACI members, which means that there were registered donors only 700,000 people. That doesn't mean that there were 700,000 organs available. Rather, it means that there were 700,000 people that were registered to be able to donate if something were to happen to them. Now, to put it into perspective, this is the list of the people who are waiting for a transplant. So the people that are waiting for a transplant in 2000, let's just go to 2013 as the most recent. You'll see here that there were 755 people waiting for a transplant for a kidney, 164 for a liver, 93 for a heart, 90 for lungs. Altogether, the number of people that were waiting for a transplant was 1,014.
Is this going to be on all?
I already told you I'll plug this in so you don't hear.
Yeah, but we're hoping to talk to you.
You won't. I'm sorry. So far, I haven't learned.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So of the 1,114 people waiting, 392 people received a transplant. Of those waiting, 147 had passed away. Okay. The idea is that there is a committee who determines who accesses or who has the ability to access transplants, who is going to be eligible for a transplant through the government committee. Okay. As you can see, there is a list of people, there is a wait period, and there's a limited number of organs that are available of who can actually receive a transplant. The idea of the private policies is that they will provide transplants. They will take you, they'll connect you with a legitimate company abroad, bring an organ to you or take you to an organ to be able to perform a transplant. Medical flights are covered by the insurance company. And essentially the idea here is that there is less of a need for the wait period. Obviously there'll be, or the eligibility process. There is still going to be a wait period because you still need to find a match. You still need to find an appropriate organ. But the idea is that the private policies assist in providing coverage for transplants and moving that forward. Next is the surgeries coverage. With regard to the surgeries, you've got three different levels. You have surgeries abroad, mashlim shaban, and surgeries from the first shekel. Surgeries abroad essentially means that even if the surgery is available in Israel, you can still choose to have the surgery abroad, okay? There it is, needs to be pre-approved, okay? The insurance company must receive the diagnosis, the paperwork to have the approval, or to provide the approval for the surgeries abroad. It does not replace travel insurance, and this is something that's very, very important to make sure you are aware of. Having this coverage does not replace travel insurance. That means that if you're abroad and you happen to need a surgery, it's not necessarily going to cover you. Like I said, it needs to have pre-approval from the insurance company in Israel. So often people will assume that the surgeries abroad will cover them abroad. That's not the case, and it's important to keep that in mind. But it means that if you want to have the surgery abroad, you're able to do so. Obviously, it's important to keep in mind, the insurance company may not cover the flight, they may not cover the accommodation. It depends on the nature of the surgery and the extent to which the surgery, as in how extensive the surgery is going to be. This isn't something that's claimed off of a lot, mainly because most people want family support around them. They want to be within the comforts of their own home with the people that they can rely on. If they're traveling abroad for a surgery, it is something that is more likely going to be something that is catastrophic, or that they're going to go to be with family abroad and have the support from people that they can be around abroad. But it is something that is definitely very interesting for Olim who may be familiar with the medical system, more familiar with the medical system from where they came from, and therefore may choose to have a surgery abroad as a result. The Mashlim Shaban, okay? The surgeries covering the Mashlim Shaban basically allows you to choose a surgeon from the participating list of doctors that work with the Kupat Cholim, okay? Where the Kupat Cholim, the Shaban being the supplementary basket which we spoke about that gives extra services, the Kupat Cholim will cover you up to X% for a surgery using someone from their network, but the rest is essentially covered by yourself, out of pocket. The Mashlim Shaban coverage basically makes up the difference of what the Kupat Cholim do not provide coverage for. The idea being that, let's say, Me'ocheret will cover via the Me'ocheret C coverage, will cover a private surgery with Dr. Cohen up to 80%. And Dr. Cohen is participating with the with Me'ocheret, so therefore they'll cover up to 80%. The private insurance company, on condition that Dr. Cohen is a participating doctor with the private insurance company, will cover the difference, will cover the other 20%, so that you're financially whole. There is more bureaucracy involved here, but it is something, but it is, as a result of that, it's a cheaper policy, because there's always or more often than not, there's going to be the participation of the Kupat Cholim. But the idea is that the insurance company will make up the difference of what the Kupat Cholim does not cover. Now, it's important to keep in mind, as of 2016, there were new regulations that came into play. So any new policies are going to be relevant. This next point is going to be relevant to. Any policies prior to 2016, they had policies where you could choose whichever surgeon you wanted, irrespective of whether or not they were participating with the insurance company. Now on newer policies, the coverage the policy will provide coverage for the surgeon outside of the government health basket. Sorry, for the surgeon outside of the participating list, my apologies, on condition, let me start again. The policy will cover a private surgery through the Kupat Cholim on condition that the doctor that is performing the surgery via the Kupat Cholim is also a participating surgeon with the private insurance company. So again, let's take Dr. Cohen. If Dr. Cohen is participating with Me'ocheret and also participating with, let's say, Migdal, okay, then Dr. Cohen will be covered 100%. Let's take Dr. Levy. Dr. Levy is covered by Me'ocheret, but not covered by Migdal. Therefore, you will only receive the payment from Me'ocheret. If there's 80% coverage, you'll have to pay the other 20%. If Dr. Jones, for example, is not covered by the Kupat Cholim, but is covered by the private insurance company, the private insurance company makes up the difference of what is not covered by the Kupat Cholim. So therefore, they will cover up to 100% of the cost of that surgery. But if you have someone like Dr. Smith, for example, that isn't covered by the Kupat Cholim, nor is covered by the private policy, then no party covers that. That means that the full expense is on you. So there is a relationship and a correlation between, is the doctor participating with the Kupat Cholim? Are they also participating with the private insurance company? And then that will determine whether or not you become financially whole from this policy. Meaning the insurance company will obviously look for all the paperwork. They'll need to understand what is involved, how much the Kupat Cholim contributed, and then they'll make their determination as to how and what they'll be paying. The next is from the first shekel. Coverage from the first shekel basically means as follows. If you need a private surgery, you have the ability to bypass the Kupat Cholim, meaning you'll need the hafnaya from the Kupat Cholim, the referral from the Kupat Cholim for that surgery. But you can choose a doctor from the participating list of surgeons. And because they're participating list, the insurance company will cover it in full with no copay or deductible on this element of cover. Now, again, going back to the regulation of 2016. Going back to the regulation of 2016, everyone must, any new policy issued, must use a participating list of surgeons. Any policies prior that were purchased prior to 2016, you still have the option of having the choice of private surgeons or choosing a doctor from the participating list. But any new policies must refer to the participating list of surgeons. Now, to touch on the surgeries coverage and the regulations as well. The regulations basically made the surgeries coverage identical across all insurance companies. Basically, it's a uniform policy across all insurance companies, any policy that was purchased after 2016. What varies between the different companies? The difference between the companies is the premium and the list of doctors. I wouldn't necessarily choose a company based on the list of doctors themselves necessarily. The reason being that lists are dynamic, okay? Because lists are dynamic, you can have a doctor that will remain part of the agreement, those that might retire, those that might have a disagreement with the insurance company and therefore leave the agreement. What's important is to make sure that you're choosing an insurance company that has a good standing, that you're taking a policy that is comprehensive for your needs and not just necessarily based on the list of doctors at the time that you purchase, because those can change. And obviously a policy that's going to be affordable for you. That's important to keep in mind. Now, before we get on to the riders, another point for those other elements and all the policies now with the new regulations. The regulations basically state that the policies can update or do update once every 2 years. That doesn't mean that you have to submit a new health declaration, but rather what that means is that the terms of the policy can be updated, ideally for the benefit of the consumer, of the insured, but also the premiums can change once every 2 years. That means that the insurance companies have an opportunity to increase the premiums if they believe that it's necessary. With that, they must submit a request to the Control of Insurance to receive approval to increase it. They need to justify it, but it means that on older policies, if the premium tables were set, and you knew exactly what the projection of premiums were going to be. Here, there is still a premium table, but in 10 years' time, if the insurance company requests to increase the premiums by 20% and the Control of Insurance approves that, that means that your premiums may increase with that as well. And therefore the premium table, while it will be the base premium to which you can base the 20% on, that can change with time as well. So it's important to keep that in mind. With regard to the riders, and we'll get into this into more depth next week when we talk about the riders for anyone who's interested in looking into it further. The idea behind the riders is that they are covering extensions. They're not the essence of the policy, but they add to the policy to make it a richer and more full policy. The main riders that exist are ambulatory coverage. Ambulatory coverage includes outpatient type services. That's consultations with specialists on a private basis, diagnostic testing on a private basis, physiotherapy treatments on a private basis, ideas like that. In some cases for children, it will include developmental type services such as tipul regshi. I forgot the word, it escapes me in English, sorry. but things such as horse riding therapy, art therapy, and various therapies to help with child development. That's an extension that can be included onto the ambulatory coverage. MOXO testing for a diagnosis of ADD, ADHD, etc. So that's something that is actually claimed off of a lot, because a lot of people do have consultations with specialists, more so than they might need to access medicines, more so than what they might need to have a transplant or a surgery, of course. So a consultation with a specialist is not necessarily going to be based on surgery, but rather it could be for any issue. If you have a medical complaint that a specialist does need to be addressed, you need to speak to the specialist for. So that's something that is actually used quite a lot. It's not the essence of the policy. It can't be purchased on its own. It must be added to one of the main elements of cover, but that is something that a lot of people do choose and do claim off of the most. Extended medicines coverage, like I said, for experimental medications or for customized medications, that is something that can be added as well. Alternative medicines, that covers things such as acupuncture, homeopathy, osteopathy, chiropractics, etc. That's something that is limited coverage, but still gives a solution. If you're going to be using those treatments anyway, it is something that's worth considering, keeping in mind that some insurance companies will limit you to a list of participating service providers, where a few other companies may allow you to have your choice of whichever service provider you want. But again, it is limited coverage. It might cover you up until a capped amount of 150 shekel, 100 shekel per consultation, and then capped at 16 or 20 consultations in a year. But it is something that is worth considering if you do use that. Rapid cancer detection, or even rapid diagnosis in general, is something that is that can be extended as well on the policy. The idea behind that is that if you wake up with X amount of symptoms that, according to WebMD, could be 10 different illnesses, you could approach your family doctor. The family doctor may be able to diagnose it relatively quickly. The idea of the rapid diagnosis is that you can turn to one of the private hospitals that's in agreement with the insurance companies. Generally speaking, that's Assuta Hospital in Ramat HaChayal or Herzliya Medical Center. They would take you in, do a battery of tests, and then check to see what the diagnosis might be. If the first round of tests might not be enough, then they may do imaging tests, etc. But it does allow you that access to try and get a diagnosis faster than what you may get through the Kupat Cholim system. Case management coverage. Here you've got the idea of experts, not determined by you, but rather determined by the insurance company. They have a list of experts that they refer to, who will basically look at your case, give you suggestions of how to develop your treatment further, and give you their opinions on the treatment. So that's something that can be added as well. The last rider, which is really a policy in itself, and this is something that will be addressed in the third part of the lecture series, is critical illness coverage. Critical illness coverage, just to touch on it briefly, is essentially a coverage where, if God forbid somebody is diagnosed with one of 41 critical illnesses, or up to 41 critical illnesses, depending on the insurance company, you would receive a predetermined sum insured, usually starting at 100,000 shekel, up to 600,000 shekel, and you could do with that money whatever it is that you choose. The idea of the money is to relieve financial burden on the family. The idea of that money is to, let's say if somebody's receiving treatment in Haifa and they live in Beersheba, to cover the cost of the commute, to cover the cost of hotel costs. That may be that if you decide to stay there for the weekend rather than commute back and forth. If there's a need for caregiving in the home to the family, maintaining or helping with the family at home. This is something that is also very important for young families in particular, where if it happens to a parent, then that's one person who's not around to help with the children. So you may need to bring in family or caregivers to be able to assist with the family. And that's obviously an added expense. In addition, God forbid, if there's an illness for one of the children, then a parent is going to be by the child's side 24/7. Again, cutting back on hours of work, cutting back on income. So it does relieve financial burden. It is something that is very, very important to consider. So that's something that will become, we'll talk about in more depth in a later lecture in this series. That's essentially the add-ons and the riders. Now, with every health insurance policy, there's underwriting, and there are possible underwriting outcomes. The underwriting basically is as follows. In order to apply for a health policy, you must fill out a health declaration. The health declaration will ask you a whole range of questions. Yes, yes, no, no. The insurance company will take the information. They may ask for more information from your doctor or from your specialist doctor to be able to understand the extent of your illness or the extent of your pre-existing condition. The insurance companies will then look at the information. They may determine that it'll be accepted under regular terms and conditions of the policy. No exclusions, no nothing. If there are pre-existing conditions, then there's likely to be exclusions or increased premiums as a result of those pre-existing conditions. An example, one example is, let's say somebody had a knee reconstruction 10 years ago. That's something where the insurance policy can exclude the knee from surgeries coverage, can exclude the knee from ambulatory coverage, meaning consultations with specialists, etc. The idea is that it's already at risk and the insurance company doesn't want to take on that responsibility or take on that risk. Then you've got increased premium options. Okay, the idea of the increased premium is that if something that cannot be excluded, the insurance company may say, since we cannot exclude it because it affects too many parts of the body, we're going to increase the premium as a result and account for the increased risk by taking a higher premium. So those are the different outcomes that may exist. Obviously, there is always the option that if there are too many medical issues, the insurance company can reject the application altogether. And as a result, there'd be no coverage there. So that is the idea of the underwriting, and it's important to keep that in mind. It's also important to make sure you give a full health declaration, the idea being that in the event of a claim, you're going to give full information to the doctor that is going to be treating you. The paperwork is submitted to the insurance company. The insurance company is going to review the paperwork. And if there is anything that has been left out of a health insurance or a health declaration, that's a very easy way for the insurance company to turn around and say, sorry, we're not covering this. It was a pre-existing condition from before you took out the policy, and therefore it's not covered. Whereas if they have the information ahead of time, they may relate to it differently. They may increase the premium as opposed to exclude it, but this way you're giving them full information to determine all the details. Some useful tips on some useful things to mention. I don't know how many people are here on this session who have been in Israel long-term or whether they're new Olim, but essentially I'll run over the points for useful tips for Olim in any case. First of all, there are few policies or very few policies that are available to anyone over the age of 69. Migdal, for example, does have a policy with a maximum entry age of 85. Other companies have it until age 70. Otherwise, it is important to be aware of what the options are. There's still coverage available, but your options are more limited. Life insurance policies in Israel don't have cash value or paid up value. The reason why I'm referring to life insurance is because it's important to be aware of all the different things if you do have policies from abroad. And you're deciding whether or not to maintain them or not. Cash value, paid up value don't exist on policies in Israel. If you do have a policy in the States or in Canada or wherever it is that you're coming from, that you've joined us from here, be aware or double check to see how the policy is covering you, whether it will cover you in Israel to the full extent. I know that there are many people and many questions with regard to Medicare in the States. Will it cover me in Israel? How does it cover me in Israel? Do I need the private insurance if I've got the coverage there? These are all questions that you need to make sure you check on the American end, okay? That they will cover you for all scenarios in Israel, or at least understand how they will cover you in Israel. For anyone who hasn't arrived yet and is interested in joining health insurance, it's important to bring all your medical documentation relating to any recent surgeries or any pre-existing medical conditions as well. And also, if there's any returning residents, there are limited coverages available to offset the limitations of the Kupat Cholim and the wait period of that. So that is something that is definitely relevant for those who haven't yet made Aliyah and are returning residents. It's important to keep that in mind. Just one point, going back to checking the policies as well for the health policies to see how they're covered. Long-term care insurance policies, I'm just going to touch on this quickly. It's not possible to purchase long-term care policies in Israel on a private basis anymore. They are still available through the Kupat Cholim. But if somebody has a long-term care policy from abroad, it's important to understand and double check how it will cover you in Israel. The idea being that while they may cover you abroad, it may be limited coverage to the first year. It may not be what you're expecting, and it's important to just have a look. That said, because there is no option of adding or joining a new policy these days, it's worth a consideration of maintaining that policy. So that's up to you guys to decide whether that makes sense, but it is important to double check your policies, what it covers you for, and how it will cover you abroad. That essentially is the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions, feel free to put them into the chat now, and I'll be happy to address it. Okay, so there's a question here. How do we keep up with changes on our private medical insurance when everything is in Hebrew? How are policyholders informed of their changes of coverage? Okay, so that's a very good question. The idea here is that the insurance companies, according to regulation, must send you updates if there are changes to your policy. Okay. Now, what that means is that they'll send you either a letter in the post, or they will send you an email based on the information that they have, based on the information that they have on their system, the contact information, letting you know of any changes or any updates to your policies. Now, of course, if it's in Hebrew and you're not strong in Hebrew, if you don't understand what it means, please don't ignore it. Too often what happens is that people receive an email or a letter and they do not address the issue. It could be an issue with regard to a delayed payment or a late payment, which may affect the validity of your policy. It may be a policy change. It may be just a general update, just to inform you that they've updated some small detail that's not necessarily relevant. But when you're in doubt, open up the information. If you're not sure, speak to your agent, whoever it might be, ask them to check what's going on, send them the letter, and ask them to double check to see what's going on, and maybe they'll give some insight into that. But that's what an agent is for, to have a look, to check in with the insurance company and see what's going on with your policies and any changes that might take place. Do companies offer private health insurance policies for employees? So companies do offer private, if I'm understanding the question correctly, there are policies, or there are companies that will offer private health insurance policies to employees, but it depends on the type of the company that it is. What that means is you've got larger companies that will give collective policies to their employees. That said, there are certain limitations or certain prerequisites to be able to provide a collective policy. What that means is that in order for it to be a collective policy, there has to be a minimum number of participants. That usually is about 100 people, 100 employees. So if your company is less than that size, then you may not be eligible, or they might not be eligible to provide you with a collective policy. That said, there are companies that will arrange a policy for you, meaning that they will cover the cost of the medical expenses. The policy will remain in your name. It is 100% your policy, but the company will be the entity paying for the policy. So until they grow to the relevant size where they can and they are eligible for to provide a collective policy, that is something that is an alternative as well. Collective policies are short-term policies. What that means is that they run for a period usually of about 5 years, and then they renew. The insurance company might say, not interested in renewing the policy for this company, and then they might switch to another company. If you leave the place of employment, you would need to make sure that you maintain that policy converted to a private policy, and make sure that you're paying it privately to make sure you're still benefiting and enjoying the policy on a private basis as opposed to on a collective basis. So that hopefully answers that question there, and hopefully I understood your question correctly there. Milcheret is offering a hybrid policy. What does that mean? I'm not sure what you mean by a hybrid policy. Like I mentioned earlier, Milcheret does, or the Kupat Cholim in general, cover supplementary baskets to the base coverage. So again, there may seem like there is some overlap between the Kupat Cholim and the private policies, but again, the Kupat Cholim are limited as to what they're able to provide in terms of medicines outside of the government health basket, transplants, and surgeries coverage. With regard to the long-term care, if it's referring to that question or to that point, the Kupat Cholim do have long-term care policies, collective policies. They are limited policies, covering you for up to 5,500 shekel at home and up to 10,000 shekel in a nursing home, but only for a 5-year period. So if that's not something that you have yet, it's probably worth considering. It is cheaper than what the private policies would have been, and it does give at least some solution if you have nothing in Israel at the moment, and it is a good alternative, seeing as though there's nothing really else available at the moment. I hope that answers the questions. Are there any other questions there? No. Okay. So essentially, that is the idea of health insurance, its function in Israel, what it does, and why it is important to add and to supplement the Kupat Cholim. There are gaps, as I mentioned, that exist in the Kupat Cholim, and the private policies essentially do provide a solution there. I had the slide up with my contact information. If anyone has any specific questions, please feel free to contact me. And if there's anything else, I'm happy to help out. Thank you again to AACI for hosting this. And we'll hope to see you next week on the presentation about the riders, and in another 2 weeks about the critical illness coverage.
Ronen, thank you very much. It was excellent.
Thanks very much.
Over to the left.
This?
Yeah.